What does the apostle say? And for what you asked me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. 1 Corinthians 7:1. However, someone might say, if it is good for a man not to touch a woman, why then is marriage established in life? What need do we have for women if they will not bring us any benefit in marriage or in bearing children? And what will prevent the destruction of the entire human race, which death daily diminishes and mows down, since this doctrine does not allow others to take their place? If all of us were to abstain from this good and refrain from touching women, everything would vanish: cities and houses, fields and crafts, animals and plants. With the fall of the military leader, the whole order of the army is also disrupted. Likewise, with the destruction of man as a consequence of celibacy, who reigns over all earthly matters, nothing will remain in the previous order and arrangement. In this way, a good commandment will fill the world with countless evils. If only enemies and unbelievers were saying such things, I would consider their words insignificant. However, many who seemingly belong to the church are saying the same. They have, on the one hand, abandoned the virtues of virginity due to weakness of will, and on the other hand, they wish to cover their negligence by belittling and neglecting virginity. They want a pretext to remove themselves from these virtues through sound reasoning of the mind, not out of necessity. Therefore we, leaving aside our enemies, for the carnal man does not accept what is of the Spirit of God, for it is foolishness to him, 1 Corinthians 2:14, will teach those who claim to be ours two things: that virginity is not superfluous, but very useful and necessary, and that the aforementioned reasoning will not go unpunished. It will bring upon them as much trouble as those who practice virginity will receive rewards and praise. When the entire world was created and everything necessary for our pleasure and use was prepared, God created man. In fact, he created the world for him. The first human lived in paradise, and there was no mention of marriage. The need for a helper arose in him, and she appeared. Nevertheless, marriage had not yet become necessary. They could have continued without it, because people would have remained living without it in paradise, much like in heaven, enjoying communion with God. Physical desire, conception, childbirth pains, and decay in general would have had no access to their souls. Instead, people, like a pure stream flowing from a clear source, would have dwelled in that abode, adorning themselves with virginity. At that time, there were no people on the entire earth, which is what the caretakers of the universe fear so much now as they diligently tend to the affairs of others. They do not think about their own affairs, but fear that the entire human race might cease to exist. They do not care about their own souls as much as they care about others, even though they will be held accountable for it, even in the smallest matters. As for the decrease in the number of people, they will not take the slightest responsibility for it. At that time, there were no cities, crafts, or houses, which you also seem to care about quite a bit. There was nothing of the sort. Yet nothing disturbed or corrupted that blessed life, which was much better than the present one. When the first humans showed disobedience to God and became dust and ashes, they lost the beauty of virginity along with the blessed life. And she left them together with God and withdrew, until they were captured by the devil, and while they revered their Lord, virginity adorned them continuously, more than a diadem and golden attire adorns kings. But when, becoming captives, they stripped themselves of royal attire and discarded heavenly adornments, accepting mortal decay, curse, hardship, and a life of suffering, marriage appeared, i.e., mortal and servile attire. He who is married, says the apostle, cares for the things of the world, 1 Corinthians 7:33. Do you see where the beginning of marriage is and why it became necessary? Because of disobedience, curse, and death. Where there is death, there is also marriage. If there had been no first, there would be no last. However, virginity has no such connection with death. It is always useful, always beautiful and blessed, before death and after death, before marriage and after marriage. Tell me, from what marriage was Adam born and what childbirth pains produced Eve? You cannot say anything about that. So why do you fear in vain and dread that with the cessation of marriage, human offspring will cease? Millions upon millions of angels serve God, and thousands upon thousands of archangels stand before him, Daniel 7:10, and not one of them came into existence through inheritance, birth, childbirth pains, or conception. In the same way, God could have created humans without marriage, just as he created the first ones from whom all others originated. And now, our race does not multiply by the power of marriage, but by the word of the Lord spoken in the beginning. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Genesis 1:28. Tell me, did marriage help Abraham to have a child? Did he not, after so many years of marital life, say, Lord, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? Genesis 15:2. And then, in the lifeless bodies of Abraham and Sarah, God made a source and root for so many thousands of people. In the same way, at the beginning, if Adam and Eve, by obeying his commandments, had abstained from partaking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a way would have been found to multiply the human race. Neither marriage without the consent of God can increase the number of existing people, nor can virginity prevent their multiplication when he desires them to be many. God, namely, chose this, as the Scripture says, because of us and because of our disobedience. For why did marriage not exist before the fall? Why were there no sexual relations in paradise? Why were there no childbirth pains before the curse? Because it was unnecessary at that time, and afterward it became necessary due to our weakness. And the same applies to everything else: cities, crafts, clothing, and many other necessities. So do not compare with virginity that which arose from your weakness, or better said, do not equate them. Otherwise, by extending this argument, you will also say that it is better to have two wives than to be content with one, since that is allowed by the Mosaic law. After that, you will also assume that wealth is preferable to voluntary poverty, overindulgence to self-restraint, and revenge to magnanimous endurance of insults. But you, someone might argue, belittle all of this. I do not belittle it in any way as God allows it. It was useful in its time. However, I assert that it is of little importance and represents more of a concern for children than for adults. Therefore, Christ, desiring to make us perfect, instructed us to leave it behind like a child's garment, which is unable to cover an adult or adorn the measure of Christ's fullness. Ephesians 4:13. He commanded us to clothe ourselves in attire that is more beautiful and perfect, without any contradiction, but with complete consistency. Although the latter commandment is greater than the former, the lawgiver's goal remains the same. What is that goal? To cut off the wickedness of our souls and elevate them to perfect virtue. He took care to establish a law that is superior to the previous one. It would greatly contradict himself if he left everything in the same form forever and never freed us from our previous inadequacy. We would never have attained the proper transformation that he initiated when he established the pattern of life in the beginning, when the human race was still in its infancy. For, from such a disproportion, the entire work of our salvation would have been dismantled. Likewise, if he had left the guidance of the law on earth after a long time had passed when heavenly wisdom was already needed, we would have gained no benefit from his coming. For the perfection for the sake of which his coming was realized would not have touched us then. Now, however, what happens to birds has occurred. When they are nurtured, the mother leads them out of the nest. If she notices that they are still weak, falling, and in need of more time in the nest, she keeps them there for a few more days. She does not leave them there permanently, but only until their wings strengthen, and they have the strength to fly without danger. Similarly, from the beginning, the Lord has been drawing us toward heaven and pointing out the path that leads there. He knew perfectly well that we were incapable of such flight, but he wanted to show us that our fall did not happen by his will, but by our weakness. Having shown us that, he then left us for a long time to be nurtured in the world and in marriage, like in a nest. When over a long period our wings of virtue grew, he came and began little by little to lead us out of our present dwelling, teaching us to strive upward. In this way, while some, remaining negligent and in deep slumber, continue to dwell in the nest, clinging to the world, others, truly noble and lovers of light, easily leave the nest and soar upwards, reaching the heavens. They renounce everything earthly, including marriage, possessions, cares, and in general, everything that usually binds us to the earth. And we should not think that marriage, permitted from the beginning, has become a necessity that hinders departure from it. You can hear that the Lord wants us to turn away from marriage from what he says, "Let him who is able to receive it, receive it." Matthew 19:12. Do not be surprised that he did not legalize it from the beginning. Even a doctor does not prescribe everything at once and at the same time for the patients. While they have a fever, he forbids them solid food. However, when it passes, as does the weakness in the body that comes from it, he introduces them to their regular diet, only eliminating the harmful foods. For when the ingredients in the body mix with each other due to their abundance or lack, it leads to illness. The same applies to the soul. Immoderate impulses of passion disrupt its health. Therefore, at the right time, when passion arises, a command against it should be at hand. For without both, the law is unable to correct the disorder that has occurred in the soul, just as the natural properties of medicines alone can never heal a wound. What is a remedy for wounds? That is the law for sins. You do not examine a doctor who sometimes cuts, sometimes cauterizes, and sometimes does neither, even though it concerns the same wounds. He often fails to reach his goal in spite of everything. Why then, O man, do you question God who never errs, but arranges everything in accordance with the wisdom that is characteristic of him? Is this not extremely foolish? He said, "Increase and multiply." Genesis 1:28, because circumstances required it, because nature raged, as it could not endure the pressure of passion, and because it had no other haven and refuge in such a storm. And what else could have been commanded? Should life have been spent in abstinence and virginity? But from this, even greater falls in the flames of passion would have intensified. Children deprived of milk, which is their only necessity, and forced to accept food suitable for adults, would gain nothing from it. It would not save them from swift death. This is why prematurity is harmful. Therefore, virginity was not imposed from the beginning. Or rather, virginity was present at the beginning and before marriage, but afterward, for the reasons stated, marriage came, and it began to be considered necessary. On the other hand, there would have been no need for it if Adam had remained obedient. But you will say, where would so many thousands of people have come from? If this concern continues to frighten you, I will ask you, how did Adam and Eve come into being when marriage was not involved? Will you say that all people would have come into being in the same way? Whether in this way or in some other, I will not speak now, because it is being explained that God did not need marriage to multiply people on earth. Reduction in the human race is not actually caused by virginity, but by sin and licentiousness. This is shown by the destruction of humans and animals, and in general, all living things on earth that occurred in the time of Noah. If the sons of God had resisted sinful lust, had respected virginity, and had not gazed with impure eyes upon the daughters of men, such a disaster would not have befallen them. Furthermore, let no one think that I consider marriage to be the cause of their destruction. I am not speaking of that now. I am showing that our race does not perish or get destroyed because of virginity, but because of sin. Marriage was given for the sake of procreation of children, and even more so for extinguishing the natural flame. The proof of this is found in what Paul says, "But because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife." 1 Corinthians 7:2. He did not say, "for the procreation of children." Moreover, he does not command them to come together, verse 5, in order to become parents of many children. But for what reason? So that Satan, he says, does not tempt you. And continuing his discourse, he did not say, "if you desire to have children." What did he say then? "If they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry." Verse 9. In the beginning, as I said, marriage had two of the above-mentioned goals. Later, when the earth and the sea and the whole universe were filled, only one of its purposes remained, the eradication of uncontrollability and licentiousness. For people who still surrender to these passions even now and want to live like pigs and indulge in debaucheries, marriage is of great benefit since it liberates them from uncleanness and capriciousness, preserving them in holiness and chastity. In any case, why should I continue to battle with shadows? You yourselves know well the sublimity of virginity, and all that you have said are mere fabrications, justifications, and coverings for lack of self-control. Finally, it is good to exercise self-control regarding disparaging virginity, even when it would be possible to speak against it with impunity. One who clings to his opinion against anything good besides other harm by his opposing and unjustifiable statements provides significant evidence of his corruption to everyone. He should, in the worst case, restrain his tongue in order to avoid a bad opinion of himself. For he should remember that one who admires people who have become famous through great achievements will receive forgiveness from all, even if he cannot emulate them. But one who not only fails to engage in such pursuits but also disparages what is worthy of many crowns will be justly hated by all as an enemy and opponent of virtue and as one in a worse state than a madman. These people, that is, the insane ones, do not know what they are doing, and they subject themselves to suffering without their own will. Even when they insult those in authority, they are not punished, but rather arouse sympathy for themselves among those whom they denigrate. And if someone presumes to do what they do without their intention, he will be justly punished by everyone as an enemy of our nature. In this way, as I mentioned, we should refrain from disparaging virginity, even when refutation would be safe. For great danger is associated with it, and not only will the one who sits and slanders his brother and underhandedly sets traps for his mother's son be punished, Psalm 49:20, but also the one who dares to deny what is splendid in the eyes of God. Listen to what another prophet says while reasoning on the same subject. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah 5:20.